Michael Binnion of the Modern Miracle Network, and he's also heads Questair Energy because we've had some announcements from the federal government on some very serious emissions targets they've set at least, and it could very seriously impact a lot of our energy sector out here. And there's a lot of questions, and we're quite concerned about it. And hopefully we can get some answers. So let's bring Michael in and hey there, Mr. Binnion, how's it going?
Good, Corey. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. So, yeah, I mean, as I talked earlier, I'm glad we can get you for a few moments because I know it's been sudden and everybody's still kind of digesting what this might mean. But Justin Trudeau announced, these 2030 targets of bringing emissions below 40 to 45% below 2005 levels, and they constantly point their finger towards the oil and gas sector when they do it. Just, I guess, to start, how might this impact oil and gas in Canada?
Yeah, Corey, I think it's really interesting. I had a good read of the announcement from the government, and at a high level, I think there's a certain level of it being ridiculous, but in some of the details, I feel like there's the beginning of the government starting to realize, coming up against reality. But just to start on your general question, the reality. I think that Canada's progress on emissions, I think, has been something like 1% in 10 or 20 years, and we're now talking how we're going to make 40% in 8 years. So if we're going to do that, that's a pretty dramatic change, and we're going to need some pretty specific plans to even talk about that. And this announcement certainly doesn't give that. And I would have to say, overall, it just seems that we've got the Prime Minister talking about the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis in Europe, the worldwide potential shortage of food. I mean, all these different security of supply chain and humanitarian issues. And his solution is, well, we need to reduce emissions in Canada, and that's going to somehow help. So it does feel out of touch at the highest level, both from how is it possibly a solution to these global problems, one, and two, how do you possibly think you're going to reduce 40% in 8 years when we've only been to do 1% in 20 years without an actual plan? So I say that's the high level answer. And then I'd love to talk to you about some of the details that I think are interesting.
Absolutely, because I mean, even if it doesn't seem achievable, they could certainly stir things up and do a lot of damage in trying to achieve something that's unachievable. And it's got a lot of people sweating right now.
Yeah, but my general take is that we've got a government that is stuck in what's what they feel is a new progressive idea, but in fact is an old and outdated idea. I think that their thinking is trapped in the 20th century. I think it was in the 1970s and 80s that environmental groups came up with the idea that the only possible solution is for us to ban, to cap, to block, to have moratoriums. We're going to have to transition off of oil and gas, and the only possible solution are going to be new forms of energy, right? And I think we've got a government that has, and they, by the way, those people, I don't think they've really had a new idea in close to 50 years. I mean, they're still saying the solution is bans and blocks and moratoriums and emissions caps like this bill. And what this government, I think, is running into, trapped in what I would say are actually old 20th century ideas for the environment, is they're running up against some new realities. And what's really brought those new realities into focus is the war and the crisis, and how you have to come straight up against this issue of energy security. And so in the document itself, what I found very interesting was an admission for the first time ever, and it's only one line, but that Canada should think about exporting more lower emissions oil and gas. Well, how long have people like me been saying that? I mean, it's just so common sense obvious. And so finally we have an admission of that. But then, of course, the overall document says, but we're going to put a cap on and make it harder. So I found that contradictory. And if I can just go on for a moment, there's two more contradictions like that, if that's okay for you. The other one that I thought was super interesting there is they finally came out, and we saw a precursor to this with Wilkinson's and Guilbeault's op-ed in the National Observer, which is interesting, right in the environmental home court there, saying that carbon technology is going to have to be part of the solution. And the International Energy Agency has been saying this. And again, people like myself at Modern Miracle, we've been saying since 2015 that the solution is better technology for all of our energy sources, including and especially for oil and gas. And now we have this government saying, "Oh, okay, we might need new tech as part of the solution." But then, of course, they are doing some things potentially make it harder. The final thing where I thought there's a bit of a contradiction is they don't say it directly, but they indirectly basically admit this carbon tax isn't working. And how they say it is they say, look, we need to make carbon pricing reliable and permanent because under the current system, there's no incentives for people to invest in that technology, to invest in exporting more oil and gas that's lower emissions, as they said they've now admitted we need to do. But there's no incentives because people don't have a long-term investors don't have long-term security that the carbon price that they'll be able to get that carbon price back on their investment. And I said, and this is again something we've been saying since 2015, the carbon tax is penalizing people. It doesn't incentivize reductions in emissions. It doesn't incentivize new technology. And they're now realizing they need something else. But again, they contradict themselves and go ahead with the carbon tax increase anyways. So I found all of those things was, as I said, just to conclude, that I think we've got a government starting to come up with the reality that Ukraine has put right into our face, but that has been hitting us already. If we really want solutions to emissions, they have to be real world solutions, not 1970s, 1980s ideas on blocks and bans. And so you've got this document that's a mixture of both blocks and bans, new technology, export more, produce less, introduce carbon pricing incentives, but increase carbon tax penalties too. It just seems like a government that's mixed up, running into reality, not knowing what to do, contradicting themselves, and of course, as all the critics have said, no specific plan in there. So
Well,
there's my diatribe. I hope that wasn't too much.
no, not at all. So it sounds like it was almost a shotgun approach. I mean, their backs on the wall. Maybe they hadn't anticipated when this plan was going to come out that there was going to be such high, resource prices at this time too, to make it look a little more unfeasible. But I guess you're looking into trying to find some areas of optimism, some realities creeping in here and there. Maybe if we could keep pushing some of those elements within the government, could learn more reality, and we could still keep a productive energy sector while working towards reasonable targets.
I do see there's an opportunity that it seems to be emerging. I'm calling it an opportunity for convergence. People like myself who started Modern Miracle in 2015 to talk about that, to say, look, let's stop comparing the benefits of one kind of energy to the impacts of another, and realize that the benefits of our current energy sources have been truly miraculous. And whatever solutions we come up with, we need to keep those benefits, and that means we need to work on the impacts. And by the way, let's not kid ourselves. Wind and solar have some pretty big impacts too, and they need to work on their technology as well. And I'm sure they will, and I know it'll get better too. But so we want to start that conversation. But I think there's now an opportunity, because that conversation is now developed. We're starting to see it even in the government's document. There's an opportunity to be a convergence of what I call solutions oriented, a new generation of environmentalists who are solutions oriented. They're against emissions. They're for the environment. They're not just automatically against oil and gas because they're against oil and gas. And these solutions-based environmentalists, some of the big oil companies, the small entrepreneurs, I think everyday people, I think there's an opportunity for us all to look and say, hey, there's some solutions here in technology. Canada we could become a world leader in what some people are thinking is going to be $1 trillion market for carbon tech. And we could be a leader in that. And that carbon tech, you look at, that's 80% of our global energy is hydrocarbons. There's enormous opportunities, lots of low hanging fruit there. We could be a leader there. The other thing is this idea of it's a global problem. We need to reduce global emissions, not Canadian emissions. Exporting more low emissions projects is part of the solution. And to understand that, penalizing people just for commuting to work or heating their homes, that's not going to solve anything. We need to incentivize some of these technologies. So I feel there's a potential for convergence, and perhaps we'll start to see that, this Liberal government will start to converge with us on some of these solutions. And as you said, that's a reason for optimism. If in fact, out of this hodgepodge document, we see some commitment to those areas that they hint at.
Oh, one can certainly hope. I mean, some of those advancements made in the hydrocarbon sector, and with carbon capture or carbon conversion, or a lot of very exciting developments. And it seems often that they just don't seem to get credit for it, though. I mean, they're trying; they're out there. Colin Craig with Second Street put on some great things when I had him on before. Everything from vodka to tennis rackets. We can utilize these things, but if they don't feel there is an incentive, as you said, well, they're going to stop eventually. And well, if governments starts recognizing that, we might be moving forward. I guess try to find that little silver lining somewhere in that big document.
Yeah, and I certainly am a proponent more of an incentive based or oriented approach to this. Let's incentivize people to reduce their emissions, to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I think that works better than this idea of penalizing people for things that they can't stop doing anything, which is heating their homes and so on and so forth. So that's a personal bias, but wherever it is, what I like to say is that a lot of this technology about being able to recycle CO2, most people don't realize you can do it, but organic chemistry is well understood. We've known for a long time, like what Second Street's been talking about, we've known for a long time that you can take CO2 and water, add energy, and turn it into everything that Mother Nature turns it into. So there's so many industrial minerals, calcium carbonate, magnesium carbonate, industrial alcohols, consumer alcohols, as Second Street referred to, fertilizer, carbon black, carbon pitch, carbon nanotubes, the cement additives. I mean, all of these things that we already know how to do today. And so, as my daughter said to me, well, Dad, if that's all true that you can do that, why haven't we been doing it already? And I said, well, there's never been an incentive. Like, we didn't recycle tin cans when I was young until we started putting deposits on beer cans and pop tins and glass bottles. Well, that's when we started recycling, because there was a deposit on the can of beer. Well, we put a deposit on the ton of CO2. Trust me, there's a lot of amazing technologies that exist already. We don't have to discover them. So I don't know that people really understand that it's possible to make hydrocarbons sustainable, that the technology exists already today. And it's just a question of, what is society willing to pay? How big a deposit are we willing to put on the can of beer, if you will? And if it's, by the way, some of these cement additive technologies, they're economic at low cost, $5 to $20 a ton. And we have a blue hydrogen project that, if the government in Quebec would let us do it, we think we could do it for under $100 a ton. And so we're talking about zero emissions production, zero emissions consumption of natural gas for under $100 a ton in Quebec potentially. So, and I know that the Pathways people, I think that they're sensing something at around $150 a ton. So if these incentives are in place, we could make massive improvements in our emissions and export it around the world. And also, by exporting our lower emissions oil and gas and other products, help a global problem.
Well, great. Well, thanks for coming on to break some of that down, and I guess just calm some of the fears, but though we're still apprehensive and concerned, and bring about show and speak to some of those things people outside of the sector don't realize are happening out there, and things that the hydrocarbon sector is already in the process of doing. So yeah. I appreciate you coming in to join us at the the end of the show here today, Mr. Binnion. And
no, thank you, Corey. It's so nice to have you on. And by the way, I get that this document, as written and as it's gone, it's a concern, that 40% number headline. I mean, without a real plan, without a new approach, look, I would call it 21st century approach, this is going to be trouble for us. But as I said, a couple hints in there. Maybe this government is starting to pivot to a modern approach. And if they do, maybe we'll see some convergence.
Well, let's hope. We really need some positive developments in this world for a change. So I'll let you get back to work there. And thanks again. And if you're just to remind everybody, this is Michael Binnion from the Modern Miracle Network and Quest Air Energy.